Hey viewers, my name's Cara. I have tossed back and forth what I wanted to talk about in this video today. This past weekend, I didn't get a chance to record it, so I'm a couple days later than I expected, and in that time, it gave me time to second guess what I was gonna do and think about whether I should do something else. But I'm just gonna stick with the idea I originally had, which is to finally make a video dedicated to this one thought that I've been saying for like over a year. I'm gonna make a video about this, but I've mentioned it in a couple other random videos before. And that topic is why we call ourselves earth-based practitioners if some of us do also involve or incorporate other planets in the solar system, the stars, if we have a belief in life on other planets, elsewhere in the galaxy, things like that. So I recently mentioned this in a pagan perspective video earlier this month before we closed out our videos in October, and the collab channel is now taking an extended break, which you may have heard if you've seen the last videos on pagan perspective right now at the end of October 2020, or my most recent video here on this channel, the last video where I updated you about that. But earlier in October, we talked about whether certain scientific disciplines have anything to do with our practice, and we talked a little bit about like astrobiology and modern cosmology and stuff like that. So I touched on this in that video. I've also touched on this in a few videos before where I have talked about the fact that I identify as an earth-based or a nature-based practitioner. But I want to spend some time in this video, so it's a dedicated video just about this topic, so I know exactly where to send people whenever this topic comes up again. So I need to give you a little bit of background. And I had definitely thought about this video being like during the summer out on my enclosed porch with all of my greenery and plants around me, and instead it is a cold, gloomy, rainy day in autumn. But you know what? It's that kind of thinking that I tend to do, where I envision talking about being an earth-based practitioner while surrounded by all of these green plants in the summertime, that keeps me from getting videos done for months and months and months. That's exactly why we're here now, even though I've been saying for months that I was going to do a video about this. So forgive the lack of greenery in this video, but we're going to talk about it. To give you a little background, last year, I think it was 2019, in the summer, at the Buckland Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Cleveland, Ohio, where I work sometimes, Oberon Zell-Ravenheart was a special guest. Oberon came for an event, talked about many different things, answered questions. Really, that's what the event was. He opened up by saying he prefers to just have people ask questions, and then he talks about them and tells stories about them and whatever. So it wasn't like a set talk or lecture or anything. Anyway, so I got to meet Oberon, and for any of you who don't know, maybe I'll put a link to his website or anything like that where you can find some basic information about him. But Oberon Zell-Ravenheart and his late wife, Morning Glory Zell-Ravenheart, have been considered very influential in the neo-pagan movement, particularly in the United States. And Oberon is also one of the founders of an organization called the Church of All Worlds. That's part of what was talked about at this event. But, so people are asking questions, and Oberon is also talking about and passing around handouts of images for people to look at. Things that you may have seen before, that you may have heard before, comparing like the way that the neurons in our brains look, the way that those like webs of connections in our body looks, and then compared to how things look at like a microscopic level, the way that mycelial web networks of fungus might look, and also on a more macro level, the way that connections between things in space look. So we're looking at like, pictures of things happening out in space, microscopic and, galaxies on a more macro level compared to how things within our body looks. You may have seen some of these comparative pictures before. If you've never seen this before, I'm sure that I am explaining it horribly right now. Like, I don't know all the correct terminology, so I might have just totally confused you. But anyway, Oberon's talking about our connection to the stars, and that, sci-fi had quite an influence on a lot of people in the neo-pagan movement, but particularly on the formation of the Church of All Worlds. It was inspired by a science fiction novel, Stranger in a Strange Land. And so we're talking about all these things. We're talking about life on other planets. We're talking about Star Trek. My partner and I talked with Oberon for a little bit about Star Trek while he was signing a book that I have that contains an interview with him, actually interviews with Oberon and Morning Glory and other Ravenhearts. So I had Oberon sign that for me, and we were chit-chatting about Star Trek Discovery and how we were liking it at the time because we had just started watching it. And so space, right? It's a thing that is already part of this conversation. So then one person who was present at the event asked the question to Oberon, why, if so many of us pagans are interested in science fiction type fantasy, if we are into space, if we are into astrology, which deals with planets other than Earth, if we believe that there is life on other planets, if we, any number of things, if that is part of our personal practice and beliefs as a pagan, then why do we refer to ourselves as earth-based practitioners? Because to this person, that sounded kind of limiting. It sounded like maybe that means we only care about Earth, or that we don't recognize or acknowledge anything happening anywhere other than the planet Earth. That was a very long-winded way of getting you to why I started thinking about this question, but I feel like that background is necessary, that it's because Oberon was already talking about all of this very space-related stuff, and it seemed like a very, logical question to ask. If a lot of us believe in these things, why do we call ourselves Earth-based? I have a very clear and sort of immediate answer to that makes a lot of sense to me. However, my answer is not what Oberon said. And I can't even tell you what Oberon said because truthfully I don't remember all of it. Oberon has this amazing skill that I would love to try to cultivate more in my life, where he can tell a story that is very engaging and maybe seems like he's taking you off on a tangential journey. And this part, I definitely do. You all know this, you watch my videos. But Oberon has the wonderful skill of knowing exactly where he's going the entire time, and so he never gets lost on those tangents. He knows exactly the journey that he's trying to take you on, and it will come right back to the point that he wanted to make. And so that is what he did in response to this person's question. He told a really intriguing and interesting story and told us about a lot of sort of tangentially related things that were like really cool, but I cannot remember all of what he said in order to answer it for you in the way that he did. But he had a really great, long, involved answer that then came back around. However, my answer is much more straightforward, and it is simply, I refer to myself as an Earth-based practitioner because I'm based on planet Earth. So if we're talking about like Star Trek, I mentioned Star Trek. If we think about how there are different star bases, people might be from Earth, but they might be based on DS9 at the time, So if somebody asked, where are you based? Because maybe they're taking a trip somewhere off planet, off station. But if someone said, where are you from? They might say, I'm Terran, I'm from Earth. Or where are you based? They might say, I'm based on DS9. You know, so for me, where are you based? Planet Earth. Okay? And to me, Earth-based and nature-based, I tend to use them interchangeably. But I could see how some people might make distinctions between them, in that I refer to myself as a nature-based practitioner because I am concerned with the cycles of nature, the natural cycles of what is going on on this planet, in my local ecosystem. And so I recognize in that the natural cycles of my area are different than the natural cycles of other areas, even on planet Earth. So saying that we are Earth-based really does refer more to like the planet, and that maybe it means that we are concerned about the welfare of the planet itself and the beings that live upon it, who live upon it. Whereas when we say nature, I feel like it can be both more specific and more general. More specific in that, as I just mentioned, the nature cycles in one area on planet Earth might be different than in other places. Climates are different, weather patterns are different. But I think it can also be more broad in the sense that when we think about natural cycles, that is a word that could also apply to the natural cycles on other planets or in other solar systems, in other galaxies, and so on, right? Because Mercury has its own natural cycle of how quickly it moves around our solar system, and every other planet has that too. They have their own natural cycles, how long their orbit is, and what their weather is like, things like that. So when we say nature-based, that can mean a lot of things. But yeah, I tend to personally use either or. So when I started thinking about this more after this person asked this question, I did realize that these terms could mean very different things to different people. And I know that there are some people who prefer one or the other, earth-based or nature-based. And it wasn't until throughout this past year, that I even started sort of bringing that up in conversation with people to find out, what do people mean when they say these terms? Because to me, they were always meant the same thing, more or less. I've always used them more or less interchangeably. I am an earth-based practitioner or a nature-based practitioner. I feel like those both apply to my path and my practice and my beliefs about natural cycles and my concern for the planet that we are on, my recognition that even though I do acknowledge other planets and stuff going on in other places, that I am based on Earth, and so my practice is really based here, and not just on Earth as a whole, but even more locally, my exact area on Earth. So again, maybe nature-based makes more sense. Maybe I need to say Northeast Ohio-based, Lake Erie-based, something like that. No, I wouldn't go that specific. But I think that gets the point across of kind of what I've been thinking. And I was really surprised that Oberon didn't just answer the question with, well, because we're on Earth. I felt like that was such a quick and logical answer in that moment that I was surprised it wasn't his answer. But it is my answer. That is the short version of my answer. I call myself Earth-based because I'm based on Earth. No matter what else I might incorporate into my practice, whether I work with symbols and associations of other planets, I am based on Earth. So it just makes sense to me. I don't know. So my question for you all, I guess, is have you ever thought about the distinctions between these two very seemingly similar terms, earth-based and nature-based? Do you consider yourself one or the other of those terms, or both? If you consider yourself both, is it because you see them as more or less the same term? Or do you recognize somewhat distinctions between them, however, both apply to you, which I feel like is more where I am now? Or do neither of those terms apply to you? Up until this point, one of the only ways that I really heard people often distinguish their practice with this term involved at all was that some people would say their practice was earth-based, somewhat kind of also meaning what I've been talking about as nature-based, concerned mostly with the earth and natural cycles and the seasons and stuff like that as we experience them here on this planet. Or, on the other hand, describing their practice as deity-based, concerned mostly with honoring deities, following myth cycles and specific stories of certain deities. Those are the two main ways that I had previously heard people talk about majorly distinguishing their practice from others. Even though, again, both of those things might be part of someone's practice, I think I've heard a lot of people sort of explain that they more or less lean toward one or the other being the main focus, the core of their practice. And then some people, it really is one or the other. Some people are earth-based and really don't do a lot with deities. Some people have a deity-based practice and really don't do much with natural cycles or seasons or anything like that. So that's my question for all of you, I guess, or things to ponder. Earth-based and nature-based, differences and similarities between that, and whether you identify with any of those, what they mean to you. And then maybe also that distinction of deity-based and earth-based. Both, neither, one or the other. Do we even think these are important distinctions to make? So yeah, just thought I would finally get around to making a video about this topic. And I actually think Oberon would be proud that I seem to have somewhat gone off on my different tangents, but kept my thought process. So I feel pretty good about that. But yeah, I was just really in awe of Oberon's ability to do that when I was there and watching it happen and hearing it happen. And I was just like, how's he going to bring this back around? Because you just know that he's going to. And he does every time. And I'm just like, oh, I want to learn to do that. Because there are so many times that I go off on one thought and then forget to finish the thought that started it. But I think I've managed to do that here. I hope that this has been coherent and cohesive enough for you to follow. And yeah, thank you so much for watching and or listening to this video, and I will see you next time. Until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.